G'day everyone, it's Matt and welcome back to another Relive Adelaide podcast. As I've said in the last few podcasts, this year is absolutely flying. So for this podcast, Adrian and I just caught up for a little bit of a relaxed chat, just to talk about some of the events that were influenced and came along because of the Adelaide Grand Prix. So as always, sit back, relax. I hope you enjoy the podcast. So Adrian will be joining us shortly for our main topic of discussion, but I'll just get some of the news out of the way first because there's been some exciting announcements during the week about the Adelaide 500, and there's also been some hokey pokey played regarding the closure of Bartels Road for the Harvest Rock Music Festival in November. So let's get into the news. Adelaide 500 news. So as of today, there's just over 110 days to go until the Adelaide 500. During the week, we saw the official launch of the Adelaide 500 in Victoria Square with a lot of big announcements made. So tickets are on sale now. I believe that they're extremely good value, and that's probably got something to do with the fact that prices have been rolled back to what they were about 10 years ago. So with general admission tickets, Thursday only, it's from $26. Friday only from $53, and Saturday only $79, Sunday only $79 as well. Or for a 4-day pass, they start at $145 for general admission. If you want to throw in a little upgrade to get some access to the pit paddock, so that's the area behind the pits where you can watch all of the, the teams working in the garages and check out the team transporters. And also the spot where I think that you've got a better chance of grabbing autographs and photos with the drivers as well. So for those pit paddock passes, Friday only is $10, and a weekend paddock pass for Saturday, Sunday is $20. So, you can't really beat that value. Also, if you're a previous grandstand ticket holder, I understand you can sign up online and then you get an email sent out providing a unique code that you can use to book your grandstand ticket. So check out adelaide500.com.au for that. Support categories were announced as well, which include the Dunlop Super 2 Series, GT racing with the Fanatec GT World Challenge Australia, the Gulf Western Oil Touring Car Masters, and the Tasman S5000 Series, the V8 powered open wheelers. So that'll be really good to see open wheel racing back on the streets of Adelaide. Also, Airtime FMX, Hot Wheels stunt team, and pedal power from the Airtime BMX team joining the action as well. Concerts have also been announced with some big names like Jimmy Barnes, Icehouse, Noiseworks, The Killers, Baker Boy, The Presets. Jump onto the Relive Adelaide Facebook page or, of course, adelaide500.com.au to check out the full list and when they'll be on stage. Lots happening regarding the Adelaide 500, and one event that I'm really looking forward to. The Adelaide Motorsport Festival. So it's been billed so far as being on the week prior to the Adelaide 500, but lately there's been no announcements, and the Adelaide Motorsport Festival Facebook page is still showing dates TBC, so to be confirmed. It's a motor racing event in the city which uses Victoria Park, and outside of that goes on to Wakefield Road. So there's very minimal disruption to traffic. So even if the event was held at a different time of the year, I can still see it going ahead. So for that reason, I have no doubt that the event is still going to happen. When exactly? Well, we're just going to have to wait to find out. I know that there's been a lot of excitement as well about the Adelaide Motorsport Festival returning, so keep an eye out on the Adelaide Motorsport Festival Facebook page for that announcement, and as soon as it's made, it'll also be on the Relive Adelaide Facebook page too. Illuminate Adelaide, there's still that large pop-up pavilion on Rundle Road, so Rundle Road is still closed between East Terrace and Decateville Terrace. Ouchhh Studios' Wisdom of AI Light has been extended, so that's running until the middle of this month. I headed along to check it out. There's a bit of footage on the Relive Adelaide YouTube channel, and before heading along, I checked out the website but didn't really know what to expect. The first thing that I was blown away by is the size of the pavilion that's set up. I was expecting something more like, that large white Kennard style marquee that you might walk through and there might be different parts to check out inside of it. But no, it's more like a large pavilion, a temporary building. And when you walk inside, it's a huge open space. They've got projectors to display the AI-driven art show, onto all four walls and the floor. The sessions go for 30 minutes. I quite enjoyed it, and of course with the location so close to Rundle Street, we grabbed a bite to eat down there after. So check out illuminateadelaide.com for tickets and for more details. In Rymill Park, CheeseFest 2022 is on in October. So that's Friday the 14th, Saturday the 15th and Sunday the 16th of October. From the CheeseFest website, with a collection of cheesemakers from all over Australia, you will find all of the different styles of cheese known. CheeseFest also attracts winemakers, brewers, food producers, restaurateurs and fermenters from all over Australia. With cheese a central ingredient, CheeseFest is a foodie's paradise. So check out cheesefest.com.au for tickets and details. The Harvest Rock Music Festival is happening, so that's on the 19th and the 20th of November in Rymill Park and King Rodney Park as well. And between that is Bartels Road. Now, there were some reports around that Bartels Road would be closed, allowing for festival goers to use that road just to go between Rymill Park and King Rodney Park. So just use it as a bit of a walkthrough. The council then voted not to close the road, which threw the event into possible cancellation. But then SA Premier Peter Malinauskas, he overruled the council's decision, declared the Harvest Rock Music Festival a major event, and now the road will be closed. So the Harvest Rock Music Festival happening on Saturday the 19th and Sunday the 20th of November. At the moment as well, Rymill Park is having some huge upgrade works in regards to infrastructure with electrical pits and the like going in. So huge investment from the Adelaide City Council and the South Australian State Government. And obviously, this is good news because it just shows the commitment of continuing on with having that part of the Eastern Parklands as an event precinct. So that's it for the news. Let's get stuck into our major topic. And once again, I caught up with Adrian in the city. G'day everyone and welcome back to another Relive Adelaide podcast. We're back in the east end of Adelaide. Once again, joined by Adrian. Adrian, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Been well?
Yes, all good. It's hard to believe the Adelaide 500's that close. It's coming along pretty quick.
We can't talk about Victoria Park without mentioning the horse racing, the heritage-listed grandstand, which is still there. That dates around the 1880s. There used to be horse racing back in the 1800s. Adrian, I'll just borrow your insight and knowledge around the Grand Prix for a moment, because if I can get this correct, the horse racing moved to Morphettville because they didn't want a permanent structure at Victoria Park, or the government didn't want a permanent structure at Victoria Park?
Essentially, they were limited by what they could do just because of the confines of the parklands and the fact that it was within the city. So when around the time of the Grand Prix, horse racing was moving more towards the suburbs anyway. So you had Morphettville, which became the main hub for horse racing in South Australia. Victoria Park was still pretty prominent, and there was no suggestion at the time that it was going to be leaving there, but it was definitely on the decline. So when the Grand Prix came along, the council and government pushing for the Grand Prix had more sway over the horse racing associations, which were still trying to protect their turf. So it was on the decline, but still pretty prominent. So it was a uneasy negotiation, if you like, they had to sort of come together and work together, because obviously the Grand Prix track was right smack bang in the middle of the horse racing facility. So some heavy negotiations, but that's where it helps when you have the council and government on your side, because they can get stuff done.
Yeah. I spoke to somebody in the equestrian field, or a few people in the equestrian field quite recently, and they mentioned about that, no permanent facilities in Victoria Park, and I mentioned to them about having a permanent pit building there, and they just said, nah, there's no way that will ever happen.
Yeah, that was the discussion from day one, and that was a compromise agreed by all parties, that there was to be no permanent facility in Victoria Park, and here we are, and we still don't, and I don't see that we ever will. I think the parklands are so protected, and it's just so unlikely, unfortunately, because I think it would really benefit not just the motorsport events. I think it could, be used for other events. Like, we've talked about Albert Park with its mixed-use facilities, where it's a sort of recreational sports centre the rest of the year, and then it becomes the paddock and pits around the time of the Grand Prix. So unfortunately, I if it didn't happen for the Grand Prix, it's unlikely to happen now. And, you know, there was a discussion in the early 90s about making a permanent facility that could be used for both the motorsport and horse racing, but that didn't come about. And then we lost the Grand Prix, so that sort of obviously went away. So it's a shame, but I think we now have this sort of the temporary structure, if you like, is sort of, it's pretty well established, so we just sort of keep with that, despite the fact that the horse racing's long gone.
Yeah, and if they did put a pit building, remember we've got the National Wine Centre, they also, through the redevelopment of the zoo, they're putting some really nice buildings which blend in with the surroundings, and, you know, could be a multi-use facility throughout the year, could even have a function centre as part of it, could host weddings, you know, could be like Adelaide Oval. You know, Adelaide Oval is a sports venue, but you also have weddings and businesses hire it out for all of their functions. So, you know, I think it can happen. Probably the Parklands Preservation Society is the people that really might need their arm twisted, or, you know.
Yeah, I think the council as well. It ultimately comes down to them and sort of the government. And, you know, we've seen over the years it's always an uneasy relationship, but I think it's always swayed towards not having a permanent facility, you know, whether it's the grandstands or the actual pit building. But you're right, I mean, the beauty of Victoria Park with the track there, you know, the track surface is it could be used for other things. You know, we've seen cycling criterium events, we've seen pedal prix, we've seen, you know, it's been a COVID testing site. I mean, you know, it could have been converted into, you know, to put it, you know, put a hole through it and make it a drive-through indoor facility. There would have been some scope to do that, and you know, the Melbourne facilities are, you know, sporting. You know, you go play basketball or netball there through the year. So, you know, there's things that could have been done, and I think it would have increased the use of Victoria Park. But as we said, unfortunately, I think if it didn't happen for the Grand Prix, I think it's unlikely now.
Yeah. So I just wanted to touch on the horse racing, even though that dates back to the 1800s. You can't talk about Victoria Park without mentioning that. If you do want to check out the horse racing, head on down to Morphettville Racecourse. Adelaide Grand Prix. So 1985 to 1995, we've ran through it in 4 parts of the podcast. Adelaide Grand Prix was the event which put Adelaide on the international map, and we've had some international events come after. But if it wasn't for the Adelaide Grand Prix, probably those people overseas wouldn't know of the name Adelaide.
Absolutely. The other event that's always talked about as Adelaide's sort of prized event is Fringe and the Arts Festival, and it's amazing, it's great, and you know, I'm always involved in it as a fan, but it hasn't had that international scope, and it hasn't put Adelaide on the map like the Grand Prix has. Nothing ever will. We're not hosting the Olympics anytime soon. Where, you know, if Australia gets the World Cup, you know, we'll be lucky to get a few games. So the Grand Prix was the next best thing, and that's left a permanent international recognition for Adelaide. That sort of, you know, that's, as we've said before, that's what you pay for. You pay for that international recognition going forward. So that really put it on the map, and everything that's come after we lost the Grand Prix is almost a result of the Grand Prix, or has sort of that Grand Prix legacy in it. And, you know, even the horse racing Victoria Park, you know, that even though that's long gone, we still associate Victoria Park with that sort of, you know, the horse racing, the Grand Prix. It's almost like it's sort of they're intertwined. And actually, just on that, you know, some of the initial track designs for the Grand Prix included the horse racing, the heritage listed grandstand. So there was a proposal to sort of, if you think of, you know, the area coming into Victoria Park just before you get into the pits, to sort of, you know, send that out wide and sort of send it more towards the horse racing grandstand. But unfortunately that didn't come off. But it was always it was a bit of a, you know, very, you know, finite sort of thing to sort of try and fit it in with all the facilities around that.
Hindsight's a wonderful thing, but it's probably good that they didn't send the track out that wide, that the grandstand sort of is a little bit separate from the track itself, because, you know, as an event and a motorsport event grows, what you would end up with is the grandstand there, and it's heritage listed. You wouldn't be able to do anything. You'd have to build around it, you know, so...
Yeah, and it's funny, I've always noticed that, you know, whether it's the Adelaide Grand Prix, even the Adelaide Motorsport Festival and the Adelaide 500, that heritage-listed grandstand becomes a bit of a sort of sanctuary. It's sort of like, you know, I notice people go there and just sort of to get away from it all and sort of sit there. So it actually serves a great purpose.
The Adelaide 500, or as some people might know it, the Clipsal 500, came to Adelaide in 1999. So there was a bit of a break. 1995 was the final Adelaide Grand Prix, and then the Adelaide 500 happened in 1999. How did that come about?
So when we lost the Grand Prix, the government set about sort of finding some replacements, and it switched on pretty quickly, knowing that it wouldn't be able to find an equivalent sized event to replace it. So the logic was that they will support lots of different events, or, you know, whether it was sporting, arts, music, and sort of back them as a way to sort of replace the Grand Prix with, you know, lots of events that could sort of hopefully get to that scale because they all add up. So eventually the Adelaide 500 became one. We're talking the Tour Down Under. The equestrian was moved from Gawler into Victoria Park. And then, you know, later on the festival and Fringe become annual. And so that's where the sort of the major events sort of festival state idea comes from. And it's sort of all these little events that add up. And, you know, some are sort of still going, some have sort of fallen by the wayside, but I think that culture's now established where it is the sort of festival state, and you see we're getting back to it now post-COVID, where there's something every, you know, month or second month that sort of, you know, something major's going on. So that was sort of what essentially replaced it, all these little different events.
The Adelaide 500 is run on a shorter version of the F1 Adelaide Street Circuit. So it's cut short and runs down Bartels Road. Why didn't they just use the original track?
First of all, they knew it wouldn't be as popular as the Grand Prix, probably wouldn't have had the crowd size and things, so they realised they needed to sort of decrease the precinct, if you like, and sort of condense it a bit. So they also wanted to minimise traffic disruption, so they, you know, thought about sort of, you know, if you sort of cut off that bit of track, it sort of limits, it leaves open another way into the city for people from that sort of eastern side. And also just the lap times as well. Supercars are a lot slower than Formula One cars, so they wanted an equivalent lap time, so they needed to cut the track. Otherwise, if you think of sitting in the main grandstand, you're not seeing as much if it's that long track. So it was a shame to lose, you know, obviously the Banana Bend and, you know, Stag and, you know, the sort of back straight, but it made sense and it worked, and it sort of made the track more of a bull ring. It sort of was, you know, it suited the racing better. And then, you know, turn 8, you know, the turn on to Bartels Road became an iconic corner in itself, and we saw plenty of action there over the years. So I think in hindsight they did a great job and it worked really well. I think using the full track while appealing from a nostalgia point of view, I don't think it would have had the same success, and it would have come at a cost of, you know, the whole Adelaide 500 experience.
I personally like the shorter circuit for the V8s because, you know, like you say, with that turn 8 where you come down Bartels Road, and it's not it's more a sweeper, like a right-handed sweep, and then you'll go on to Decateville Terrace. I'd like to hear what some of the drivers have to say about taking that turn, because it seems like, and especially watching the TV footage, is when you see the cars come round, it's almost like a controlled slide. And I wonder whether, you know, that's a corner that you've, you know, just go straight into it, or whether it's something that you've got to build yourself up to and then come qualifying, just go, you know what, because that's the other thing. If you get it wrong on turn 8, there's no curb you're going onto or a little bit of grass that you're going onto. If you run wide, you're straight into a concrete wall.
Yeah, I've spoken to a few of them, and they love and hate it for that exact reason. They love it because it is one of the most challenging corners, and they can make a difference. You know, like you're right, on a qualifying lap, you can see the commitment. You can see how close they're getting to on the outside wall. But they hate it because, again, if you get it wrong, you're in big trouble, and it's, you know, a sort of potentially weekend-ending, you know, sort of accident. So it's those corners, you know, that sort of make a difference to a track. It's sort of that, you know, old saying of, you know, great circuits have great consequences, and it sort of adds that element of danger that sort of, you know, in a sense, the old Grand Prix track had those sort of corners, but turn 8's at a different level when you think, I mean, Formula 1 would never race on a track with a corner like that for obvious reasons. So it helped differentiate it from the Grand Prix, which is what it needed. It couldn't have been a Grand Prix imitation. It needed to find its own sort of identity, which it did. And that track change, although, as we said, it was a shame to lose that original layout, I think it still works pretty well. And it's I can't see them ever going back to the full track now, but I think it serves its purpose for sure.
Yeah. We'll do a bit of an extended podcast around the Adelaide 500, similar to the Adelaide Grand Prix podcast we did, but we'll split it over a couple of parts. But just want to touch on it because, yes, the Adelaide 500 is happening this year, but the Liberal government under Stephen Marshall did cancel the Adelaide 500. We've now got a Labor government in and they've brought it back. Could you believe that the Adelaide 500 got cancelled? When you saw that on the news, could you actually believe what you was seeing?
I could see it coming, sort of. I think those last few years it was run in a different way. So when the Motorsport board was disbanded, I think it was around 2017, around there, and the control of the event was handed to the government and the events SA. It just changed the whole dynamic of the event, and it was no longer run like the Grand Prix was, where it was run by sort of motorsport people for motorsport. It was run as a major event, and the problem with that is it was run as a major event alongside the other major event in the state. So there was this odd competition amongst themselves, and I always feared it was always going to lose that battle. And each year I could see the fringe encroaching on the sort of, it was getting closer and closer, and it just didn't make sense. And then it became this thing where the Adelaide 500 was almost seen as the odd one out at that time, as the annoying thing that popped up for one weekend during Fringe. And that's never a good thing when you're perceived like that, not to mention the traffic disruptions and all that. So I could see the writing on the wall. And, working at the event, there was a very visible decline in terms of the atmosphere and the events associated with the concerts. There was one year where they didn't do a concert on the Sunday night at the Adelaide 500 because there was a festival concert across the other side of the city that they wanted people to go to. That's where you're competing against yourself. So, and then when COVID came along, I think that was just the perfect excuse for them to pull the plug. We could do a whole podcast on the reasons for that and all the speculation around that. But I think ultimately was the government took control of it. It didn't run it properly as well as the Motorsport board, and then it just became a sort of a thing where COVID was the good enough reason to be done with it. And obviously now it's a bit of a political game as to sort of one favours it and the other doesn't. So hopefully it can get back on its feet and establish itself so it doesn't need government support as much.
Yep. I think just recently the Liberal come out and said that they realised that it was a mistake to cancel the event. So that's good. So it looks like at the moment that Liberal and Labor, they're both working together and they want the event to happen. The SA Motorsport board's back in business. Adelaide 500 is back this December. Like I said, we'll do a separate podcast on the Adelaide 500 in the future. So Adelaide 500 is run on a shorter version of the Adelaide Formula One circuit. But the last event to use the full circuit was on New Year's Eve 2000 for the race of 1,000 years. Don Panos signed a 10-year deal with the state government, but it only happened for 1 year. It was a great event.
It was. You look back at the history of the Adelaide Street Circuit, I describe it as an anomaly. It's strange that it happened. It just happened once on New Year's Eve of all times, and then it sort of just disappears, and it's very rarely talked about, and it will go down in history as the last motorsport event on the full Grand Prix circuit. Very strange around it, a lot of politics involved, a lot of, we went from having nothing in 98 and then 99 we have, the Adelaide 500 back, and then in 2000, essentially we have two events. And if you think about it, the race of 1,000 years happens in December, and then 4 months later, the Adelaide 500 happens. So you think of the logistics of building the track and, then downsizing to the shorter track for an event, a few months later is, massive logistics issues. And I think that was ultimately what cost it. I think the government saw it was going to be very hard to do both at a different time of year and different, different types of events. One's international, one's domestic, one's run by an overseas, series. The other's sort of, run by the SA Motorsport board itself. So, I think it sort of was a victim of politics, but strange that it happened, and just amazing that it did when you think of it, just the timing, and it just very peculiar.
Yeah. Is there any reason they wanted to have it on New Year's Eve? I mean, it's a weird date for an event like...
I think it was to turn it into that sort of party type event, to tap into that sort of that Grand Prix way, the concerts and things. In Excess played the post-race concert, which was, just before midnight. So it was this big thing, and it was still part of that post-Grand Prix events. Let's try different things and let's really, carry the momentum from the Grand Prix. But it was... it was an interesting choice of series. The assumption was the series was about to, really boom, and there was, it was the Asian Le Mans series was going to sort of come off the American Le Mans series, and Adelaide was going to be the big marquee event of that calendar. It sort of never really developed from that. If anything, it was the high point for that category, and then it sort of, went away over the coming years, and we've seen sports car racing sort of has had its, declines and its booms over the years. So it would have been interesting. I can't imagine it, even if it sort of went on for more than 1 year, I can't imagine it would have got to that 10-year, completed its contract. But, glad it happened, but it's this weird event that happens in the middle of, the Grand Prix and the 500, and then we sort of just almost forget about it.
Yeah. We'll just be doing, I think, one podcast on the race of 1,000 years. I don't think we can stretch that out over a 3-part series. But yeah, so 10-year deal was signed to have the race of 1,000 years, cancelled after 1 year. Dom Panos sued the SA state government and was settled later down the track out of court. The Pedal Prix, you mentioned in the last podcast, Adrian, that the Pedal Prix actually happened, which I didn't know, around the same time as the Adelaide Grand Prix.
Yeah, same year in 1985, and it was one of those events which was sort of, everyone got behind the Grand Prix, and it was, how can we sort of tap into this and celebrate this and do all that, and that was one of the ideas to get schools involved and sort of, to develop it, and it was born from there, and it's still, trucking along, and I think I can only imagine the thousands of school kids who have been involved, across, so many different schools across South Australia, and it's great to see. It definitely, has become its own thing, and it's become a very, South Australian thing, to be involved in, and it's great to see, and it's great to see, it's still racing in Victoria Park all these years later, and I think it's one of those Grand Prix legacies that we think of as, it's sort of almost in the psyche of Adelaide now, and we don't associate it with the Grand Prix, but that's where it sort of originates from.
Yeah. So you mentioned after the Adelaide Grand Prix finished in 1995, they had a little bit of a budget to put together to look and put on multiple different events rather than just one big one. Obviously, the state was still in a little bit of a dodgy financial position at the time, but from that Tour Down Under, that came from it?
Yes, Tour Down Under was probably the event, the major event to come from it, if you think of it, and started in the same year as the Adelaide 500 in 1999, and it's, probably the event most similar to the Grand Prix in the sense that it taps into an international audience. You get sort of, riders and teams from overseas. We saw Lance Armstrong here, for example. That was a big deal. Everything going belly up there, but let's not talk about that. So it's sort of... It came from that major events commission, which was set up to find replacement events, and down the track it became part of the Cycling World Tour, and now obviously the plans to come back post COVID, so it'll be great to have that. And the great thing about the Tour Down Under is it sort of can spread its wings across the state, so we see stages in Victor Harbour and Stirling and the like. So I think that's probably been the major success story out of the sort of post-Grand Prix replacement sort of era. But there were so many. I mean, I've come across recently, there was even discussions to try and organise a boxing fight with Mike Tyson and host it in Adelaide. Things like that were sort of discussed because it was just that whole idea of, let's try anything, let's just fight anything because we need it.
Yeah.
You know, you can't go from having a Grand Prix every year to having nothing. So, but I think the Tour Down Under is the one which will probably have the bigger lasting legacy.
Yeah. The Adelaide Grand Prix was great because it put, Adelaide on the map, with the name of Adelaide on the map. I think some of the drivers might have headed up to Cleveland Wildlife Park and had photos taken with the koalas, but the Tour Down Under, because it's so spread across the state, we get that international exposure for, the Barossa. You've got Gawler, all of the different places around the state. And then when tourists come over, it's fantastic. So, yeah, Tour Down Under, fantastic event. The Equestrian Festival also springs from the ending of the Grand Prix as well. So the Adelaide Equestrian Festival will be back next year. I think we discussed that in the last podcast. Great event to have in the city, another offshoot of the Adelaide Grand Prix.
Yeah, that was hosted at Gawler. And then when the Grand Prix was lost and they're looking to sort of bring major events back into Adelaide, they moved that into Victoria Park. And there was a bit of controversy around that because it was depriving a regional area of a major event to sort of bring it into the city. But it seemed to work, and it was, again, its own success story. And again, post-COVID, it's great to see these major events coming back, and hopefully it can sort of get back to how things were.
One of the largest annual arts festivals in the world. The Adelaide Fringe actually predates the Grand Prix, but obviously from the Grand Prix, Adelaide Grand Prix gives international exposure to Adelaide, helps attract a lot more of those artists. And I think when the Grand Prix, or around the same time as the Grand Prix, that's when the Adelaide Fringe Festival became annual.
Yep, that was the push around then to make it sort of annual. Well, both of them, Fringe and the festival itself. So it follows pretty soon after, and it's pretty well established that they're both on at the same time, and they tend to sort of dominate that February, March period where the Adelaide 500 previously sat. So I think, alongside the Tour Down Under, they're probably, what we know Adelaide for in terms of major events, and I think it's just part of the fabric now of the state, and I think that's where the events legacy that the Grand Prix left is part of that. Obviously, Fringe and Festival predate that, but they weren't the sort of well-established annual things that they are now, and you just see it. And what's great now is, if we look at the timing of the calendar moving forward, you're going to have, the Adelaide 500 at the end of the year. Then you go into January with the Tour Down Under, Fringe Festival February, March. Adelaide tends to hibernate a bit during winter, which is great, but we've still got, things like Illuminate and the like, and then you sort of come back into the spring, and that's where we get back and sort of lead into the Adelaide 500. So it's good to see them sort of spreading its wings and, spreading out so each event can have its own sort of time in the sun, and then go from there. That's exactly what the Grand Prix legacy was.
Yeah, and with those huge infrastructure works as well happening at the moment down at Rymill Park, that Fringe Festival is definitely here to stay.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's just part of the fabric of the city, and I think, it never made sense to me why you'd have the Adelaide 500 and Fringe at the same time, because the Fringe is sort of, such a different thing, but it's great to see. That's exactly what a city like Adelaide needs. We're never going to get an international event of that ilk, but we can sort of do what we can. I think the Fringe and Tour Down Under come closest because they have that international component which the Grand Prix had, and which, let's be honest, Adelaide 500 is unlikely to have because it's a domestic series. Yeah. So, Adelaide is spoken about alongside Edinburgh when it comes to Fringe festivals. So it's definitely, internationally recognised, and, that's what the Grand Prix was all about.
Not too sure how it's tracking at the moment, but I know that a couple of years ago, the Adelaide Fringe Festival was the second largest arts festival in the world, second only to Edinburgh. I mean, Edinburgh Festival, that's absolutely massive, and for little old Adelaide to be running second, can't complain about that.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's a city that, when it wants to, it can really punch above its weight, and that's what we saw with the Grand Prix, with Fringe, with the Tour Down Under. Let's not forget we're not the biggest Australian city, not even close. So to do this is pretty impressive. It's just a case of capitalising on it and growing offshoot events around it.
Also, what we're going to be doing in the podcast is just putting in a little funny story or an interesting story which relates back to the Adelaide Grand Prix. So when they knew that the Adelaide Grand Prix was going to finish up, in Adelaide. Was there talk around stealing Indy off of the Gold Coast?
Yeah, so they were sort of looking for replacements, and one of the ideas was to have discussions and see if they could grab that Gold Coast Indy event, which had been held at Surfers Paradise since '91, but it was sort of in some financial turmoil, and there's some discussions around whether the promoter and the Queensland government was going to continue with it. So there were brief discussions around Adelaide potentially grabbing it. It seemed like a possibility, but it just never happened. I think the realisation is the reasons we lost the Grand Prix were sort of, still going to have an effect in terms of the financial turmoil the state was, but it was definitely in discussion at the time, and that would have been fascinating if we had just grabbed it. You imagine the musical chairs of the Grand Prix moved from Adelaide to Melbourne, the Indy cars moved from Gold Coast to Adelaide. Whether it would have worked, whether it would have fit, I'm not sure. It would have felt like a sort of step down from Grand Prix, but it still would have been, high-powered open-wheel cars. Remember, IndyCar at the time was on fire. Nigel Mansell raced there for a couple of years, and had Emerson Fittipaldi and Mario Andretti and these greats, but it stayed on the Gold Coast, and it sort of continued for a couple of decades since. But it was definitely a discussion and talking point for a few weeks, if not a couple of months. But just one of those what could have been.
Yeah. So like I said at the start, this was just a bit of a casual chat around some of the events that sprung off from the Adelaide Grand Prix, also around that time. Obviously mentioned about the horse racing as well in Victoria Park from the 1800s. Next podcast, what we're going to do is we're going to have a quiz at the start. We'll give the answers at the end, throw in that funny story as well, but we'll have the quiz, just one question today. At the end, we'll give the answer next podcast, and hopefully for the next podcast, I'll be a bit more organised and there'll be a bit more structure to it. So, question from the Adelaide Grand Prix. Adrian, what have you got for us?
So, only one driver raced in all 11 Adelaide Grand Prix.
Okay.
So, who was that driver? I can give a couple of clues.
Okay, let's have a guess first of all. So I remember Prost sticker getting ripped off the Ferrari, so not him. Okay.
No, and he missed 91 and 92. So 91 he was sacked by Ferrari.
That's right.
Heading in, and then 92 he has a sabbatical, and then he retires post 93, so he misses 94 and 95. So actually he's sort of doesn't even come close compared to some other drivers who almost got there, but there's only one who was there from 85 to 95.
Well, I'm way off, so what little hints have you got for us?
So he won it a couple of times.
Okay. And
he won it for two different teams.
Mm.
He won multiple F1 races, obviously. His career extended before and after the Grand Prix. Actually, he raced into the Melbourne era. He raced in Melbourne, let me think, two times into 96 and 97, so he retires at the end of 97. He's still around in motorsport, and I'll leave it at that. I can't give away too much more.
I've got a couple of guesses, but have a think at home who you think the driver might be. So he raced a couple of times in Melbourne and raced at all 11 Adelaide Grand Prix races. Throw a comment on the Facebook page or on the YouTube channel of who you think the driver might be. So to keep up to date with all of the latest from Relive Adelaide, don't forget to check out the Facebook page and give it a like, and check out the YouTube channel and give that a subscribe too. Adrian, thanks again.
Thank you.
Keep smiling, everyone, and bye for now.